Hello, I'm Oded Grober, and welcome to our new season of The Social Blog. On this week's show, we'll be discussing emigration. More specifically, we'll see how the young generation in the Western world is seeking opportunities in new and unexpected places. There's also a reverse immigration process in many developed countries. Here in Israel, for example, a young generation is leaving the country to find economic stability and better job opportunities elsewhere. The question is, what price are we paying for that lost generation? So to answer that and much more, let's go to the studio and meet our guests. So we're joined today by Elizabeth Tsurkov, a blogger and the project director at the Hotline for Refugees and Migrants, and by Joanna Landau, the founder and executive director of Kinetis. Thank you both for coming in today.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure having you. Let's start with you, Joanna. Tell me a little bit about you and about Kinetis.
So I'm originally from England, as you can hear from the accent. My parents came to live here when I was very young, and over the years I sort of had a question of whether I want to stay here or not. After the army, I decided Israel was where I wanted to make my home. And I've been...
You immediately left to England.
Exactly. No, I was actually in England for high school. I went to a Jewish boarding school, and then when I came back to the army, sort of a bit of an English rose.
And Kinetis?
Kinetis was much later, when I decided that I feel that Israel has as much to offer as any other country in the world, sometimes even more, a lot of times even less. But still, we have something to offer, and we're here to change the way people think and feel about Israel. Okay. And the way we do that is by targeting people who do not have a strong political opinion about Israel and are therefore interested in Israel politically, but rather everybody else, and that's what we like to call the silent majority, who have no relationship with Israel. We target them by bringing the biggest bloggers in the world to Israel and showing them what Israel has to offer. And we have educational programs here in Israel for the next generation that we're going to be talking about today.
Sounds very interesting. Elizabeth, you work a lot with immigrants and migrants that come to Israel, but I want to ask you about actually the other way around. What can you tell me about your generation, your friends, your maybe family members who decided to leave Israel? Do you know any people like that?
I know many people like that. I see two kind of main groups of people leaving. People who are simply the classic brain drain. People who are simply very, very smart and know that they can make a lot more money and live much more comfortably abroad. And then there's a group who leave for political reasons because they feel that they can no longer stay in Israel.
Yeah. Well, we'll talk more about this. First, let's go to our portrait of the day about a young couple who left Israel to move to Warsaw in Poland. While many Israelis travel every year to Poland, usually their destination is the Auschwitz-Birkenau Museum. Yet in recent years, Warsaw has begun to attract young people for very different reasons. Our reporter David Gombin went to meet one such couple.
While for some Warsaw is synonymous with the ghetto revolt, for others it has become the new hipster destination. Goodbye Berlin, Europe's new trendy capital, is Warsaw. That at least is the opinion of this young couple, Matan and Noga, Israelis who left their home a year ago to move to the Polish capital. This 30-year-old couple are both graduates, Matan in History and Humanities, Noga in Styling and Modeling. While working at the Institute of Jewish History and Genealogy, Noga launched her own brand of homemade toys, and because Israel didn't hold many opportunities for either of them, they moved to Poland where they could get a new start.
It's both a professional opportunity for both of us and a personal one as well. Certainly for Noga, who can now sell to the European market and be closer to business events. And for me as well, for the connection to new and interesting domains.
The decision was well planned by Matan, but for Noga it was more spontaneous.
It was a quick decision. For me, it was essential not to overthink it and to just do it and not stress over it too much. Before I came to Poland, I heard a lot of interesting things about the place. For some reason, I got stuck on it, with no real practical reason why.
As soon as they arrived, they were surprised by the warm welcome from the locals.
We were impressed with how nice the Polish people were to foreigners. Even if they don't speak great English or don't completely understand, they were always willing to help, especially foreigners.
Yet it must be said, to leave a country where the sun shines 300 days a year to settle in a country known for its harsh winters is not easy. For many relatives in Israel, it was an absurd decision.
For most Israelis, it's hard to understand our decision. From the typical Israeli perspective, Poland holds horrifying memories. It's like one giant Jewish cemetery, which is why they can't understand the decision to come and live here. It's just not generally accepted.
By letting go of the past and focusing on a promising future, Noga and Matan have been able to find their place. Recently, Warsaw has been renamed the Phoenix Rising from the Ashes, a metaphor that Noga and Matan are happy to embrace.
All right, I wanna begin our discussion with a short Hebrew lesson for our viewers. When an Israeli citizen leaves Israel, it's called in Hebrew yerida, which literally translates to going down, as opposed to when someone moves to Israel, it's called aliyah, which is to go up. Now, I feel that inherent in these words is a moral judgment that I'm not sure there's any reason for. I'd like to hear your view on it. Let's begin with you, Elizabeth.
I definitely agree that the terminology is laden with ideology, but I also think that today, even when people my age use the word yerida or hagira, simply immigration, it doesn't have that connotation anymore because it is just seen as a pretty legitimate thing to do and just as part of the growing trend of individualism. We're doing what's good for us. The older generation definitely use the term yerida much, much more, and it carries a judgment.
Mm-hmm. Do you agree?
Yeah, I do agree. I think it's very judgmental, and I think that you can look at this in various aspects of the Hebrew language. I'm sure other languages as well. But if you look at, for example, l'chazor b'tshuva v'l'chazor b'she'ela, becoming religious and becoming secular, it's having the same kind of connotation. And I think
is this unique to Israel, though?
Yes, I would say that it's unique to Israel in terms of going up and going down, and I think that the question becomes less relevant over time, and we should be less judgmental of the desire of people to find themselves wherever they choose.
Yeah. Well, just last year in Israel, there was a report on Channel 10 News about young Israelis leaving the country to move to Berlin, where the cost of living is lower. And the Minister of Finance, Yair Lapid, reacted to the report. He wrote on his Facebook page, and I quote, "As it happens, I'm in Budapest. I came here to speak before Parliament about anti-Semitism and to remind them how they tried to murder my father here, just because Jews did not have a country of their own. So forgive me if I'm a bit intolerant of people who are prepared to throw away the only country that the Jews have just because Berlin is more comfortable." Obviously, there were a lot of responses to this post. Some said, some supported, some not so much, saying that Israeli food in Berlin costs less than in Israel, and people who grew up here and said that even they can only see opportunities for their children elsewhere. So what do we take from this? We can see some of the responses there. But what do we take from this?
I understand the sentiment. I think perhaps it's the way that was said that was upsetting to a lot of people. And of course, in his position as Minister of Finance, then that's an easy target. But I totally understand that place where he's at between the memory of the Holocaust and wanting to keep it going and understanding that Israel's the only place for the Jews. And on the other side of the issue is the fact that people want to consider other options. Israel is a unique country in that respect. I think to a certain extent, a lot of young Israelis don't appreciate what it offers Jews, and they go and try and find their options elsewhere. I think the choice of words could have been better, but I totally understand the sentiment and I can relate to it very much. I think I'm in between these stages of where Elizabeth is at and where the older generation is at, and I think we can respect both.
Elizabeth, do you think that maybe Israelis, young Israelis especially, are a little bit too spoiled, too entitled, feeling of entitlement?
I definitely think that there is a growing sense of individualism. People feel less of a need to preserve the state by staying here. At the same time, the current economic situation of people of my generation is much, much worse than it was the previous generation. And people like Yair Lapid, who are multimillionaires, have absolutely no right to tell Israelis that Israel is just fine and people should stay here because it's the right place for Jews. When you scare people into staying here because of anti-Semitism, it shows a kind of the bankruptcy of the idea itself, that it needs to be bad abroad for us to stay here.
I'd like, if I can,
Please.
comment. I think that looking at it from that perspective, it sort of narrows the conversation. In a sense, if you saw Israel as a vacuum, just Israel on its own, and you saw the economic conditions, you would say it's very difficult for young people to make a life here. But if you compare it to all the other options, not everybody's going to Warsaw. And Berlin in 5 years' time won't be a place where people can go. So at some point, you have to understand that the country is actually making a big offering, giving an offering that is attractive, and other options may be viable. But I'm very interested to see what happens when they go and they experience it. Perhaps the things that they get in Israel, they lose out on over there, and maybe they come back. I think he has the right to say it because he represents a lot of people who feel that way.
Well,
it was the way that he said it.
There's a general feeling among Israelis that the grass is greener on the other side. I think so. But on the other hand, it might be worth for them to stay here and invest their energy in trying to improve the situation here.
Well, that's what I'm trying to do. I'm sure that's what you're trying to do as well. I also understand people who feel that it's a lost cause. I have many friends who feel this way, especially after wars, after conflicts, after deterioration in the state of Israeli democracy, and they just feel we no longer belong here.
Yeah.
Our voices are being silenced. We should just leave.
Yeah, well, historically that is accurate. Following wars or periods of economic difficulty, emigration from Israel usually goes up. Following this summer, have you began sensing that we're again gonna have that? More and more people gonna leave Israel following this summer?
I think that definitely more people made the decision to leave, but it takes a long time to find the opportunity to leave, to study the language. Many people in my circle, people who are leftists, said we no longer belong here, this country is going crazy, and now they're looking for opportunities, but it takes time to find them.
I think this is exactly why we have educational programming here in Israel, Kinetis does, because somehow something's been lost in the discussion. We don't appreciate a lot of the things that Israel has to offer. It's never highlighted. We discuss the wars, we discuss the hardship, we talk about our economic issues, but we never talk about the positive aspects.
No, we
these
said
things
that there's
are
good weather here.
Oh, great.
Let's keep going. While Israel may be experiencing a low immigration rate, there is a new trend in many Western countries, reverse immigration. Young people in developed countries are actually looking for opportunities back in their parents' native countries, mainly because of the economic downturn of recent years. Let's take a look at today's post by Marie Semlin.
The USA and Europe, are they becoming worlds of emigration? The former masters of the world were punched in the face by the economic crisis, and Americans are going to work in Mexico. Now there are nearly 1 million Americans living south of the border, and in recent years, more Americans have been added to Mexico's population than Mexicans to the US population. Europe is also experiencing a reversal, where young people have had a hard time finding a job and prefer to look elsewhere. The Portuguese are moving to Brazil and Angola, Anglo-Saxons to Australia, while there are 40,000 Greeks on the waiting list to immigrate to Oceania. Germany may be the only country in Europe still attracting graduates. Rodrigo, with his bright smile and his wrench, is one of the participants in the program Make It in Germany. one of the initiatives created by the German government to take advantage of unemployed European youth sick and tired of not working. To stay or to leave, that is the question. While some believe they need to fight in their country, others think that they owe nothing to a country that has given them nothing.
So what are we learning from this? That there's a balance eventually with everything?
I definitely don't think that overall the much larger trend, and I follow it personally as part of my work, is people from the developing world fleeing war or just hard life and going to the West. So overall, definitely more people are going to the West than Westerners coming back.
Yeah.
I think it's a question of globalization in general. People are interested in trying new things, and I certainly am in favor of that. I think every Israeli should experience what it means to live abroad as well. And you'll find that statistics show that more people come back than in any other country in the world. And so I think that proves itself.
That is true. Thank you so much, Joanna and Elizabeth, for coming in and speaking to me about this. Thank you at home for joining us as well. It was a pleasure having you joining us for this show. We'll be back next week with a whole new show for you in this new season of the Social Blog. Please join us. Till then, you can find our past shows online, i24news.tv, and you can follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Write to us, let us know what you thought about our show, and of course, be here next week.